For over 80 years, some of the darkest secrets of World War II have remained buried, not by accident, but by design. These aren't just forgotten events lost to time. These are stories so strange, so dangerous, and so unexplained that entire governments have gone silent about them. From vanishing convoys and secret weapons to gold that funds global shadows, what if the war never really ended, and its greatest mysteries were never meant to be uncovered? Welcome to Unsolved Archives, where we delve into the hidden, the mysterious, and the unanswered. Share your thoughts in the comments. Your insight could be the key to unlocking the truth. The disappearance of Flight 19's predecessor, the Ghost Convoy of 1944. In early February of 1944, a small Allied naval convoy designated CX-79 departed from Reykjavik, Iceland, en route to a secure British harbor on the western coast of Scotland. The North Atlantic route had been deemed relatively safe, especially during winter months when U-boat activity was statistically low. The convoy included 3 supply ships, 2 destroyer escorts, and a converted Canadian icebreaker acting as lead escort. They carried ammunition, medical supplies, and food, nothing especially high priority or secretive on the manifest. The sea was calm, visibility was fair, and all communications equipment was checked and functioning prior to departure. Roughly 2 days into the voyage, somewhere west of the Faroe Islands, CX-79 made its final radio check-in at 0400 hours. The icebreaker's signal relayed the expected message, making steady time. Weather clear. Will report again at 0900. But that report never came, and no further signals were received from any ship in the group. What followed was a full-scale maritime mystery. Within 24 hours, the Royal Navy initiated search operations. Aircraft were dispatched from multiple bases across the British Isles and Iceland. Naval radar stations scanned the sea lanes. Ships were rerouted to sweep the projected path of the convoy. Yet, there were no oil slicks, no lifeboats, no floating cargo. Not even a piece of torn canvas. 6 ships, and nearly 200 men, had disappeared without a trace. Declassified documents decades later revealed that this wasn't just a case of poor weather or bad luck. Internal Royal Navy records noted unusual interference on radar systems and communication lines in the hours following the convoy's disappearance. Several pilots reported strange electromagnetic bursts in the air when flying over the region, describing compass malfunctions and sudden drops in altitude. Some aircraft even returned to base with fried radio equipment. These anomalies led to quiet speculation inside British intelligence circles that the disappearance may not have been a standard wartime loss. American intelligence, too, took interest. In a document uncovered in the 1980s under the Freedom of Information Act, a Navy cryptographer stationed in Newfoundland noted that a German submarine transmission was intercepted in the vicinity just days prior, using an encryption format never seen before. When broken weeks later, the decoded message appeared to reference an observational engagement involving interference protocols. But strangely, no German U-boat captain ever claimed to have sunk any part of CX-79. And no German records post-war mentioned the convoy at all. Then there were the witnesses. A fisherman from the Shetland Islands reported seeing flashes of blue light low on the horizon around the estimated time of disappearance. Another ship, the HMS Bracken, on patrol just 80 nautical miles south of the projected path, claimed to observe a brief but massive spike on sonar, described as something unnatural, followed by absolute silence. Its captain logged the anomaly but received orders to stay quiet. Years later, his daughter would release a copy of the ship's personal log, which had a single line redacted in ink, followed by the ominous handwritten note, "They made it vanish." Some theorists later suggested that the convoy may have been caught in experimental electromagnetic warfare, possibly from Allied testing themselves. Around that time, secret experiments in radar jamming and cloaking were underway, including the infamous Philadelphia experiment myth that involved warships rendered invisible by manipulating electromagnetic fields. Could CX-79 have been a victim of friendly fire from a top-secret trial gone wrong? Or was it swept into a gap in reality caused by unknown natural forces? More fringe explanations soon arose. Paranormal theorists connected the event with the so-called Devil's Sea of the North, suggesting the convoy may have entered a temporary rift in spacetime. Some even likened it to early versions of what would later be known as the Bermuda Triangle phenomenon. One radio operator at RAF Lossiemouth later described a strange hum on the frequency used by CX-79 that persisted for days after the disappearance, though this report was dismissed as equipment error. A particularly curious detail came to light in 1996, when a sonar team mapping part of the ocean floor near the convoy's last known location discovered a large, rectangular formation beneath the silt, far larger than a ship, with sharp angles that didn't resemble any known geological feature. When they returned to the site 2 months later for imaging, the anomaly was gone. Seismologists argued the structure could have been a temporary shift in the silt bed. But conspiracy theorists were quick to claim a cover-up, especially after the ship's logs and sonar data mysteriously disappeared from the official archive 2 years later. Families of the missing crew members never received satisfactory answers. Some received standard telegrams of "lost at sea," with no further explanation. A few received classified letters hinting at extraordinary circumstances, which were quickly followed by requests to remain silent for national security reasons. Decades on, survivors' children have asked for full declassification of all records related to the incident, but key files remain sealed under military secrecy laws in both the UK and the United States. To this day, no wreckage from Convoy CX-79 has ever been found. No bodies were recovered. It remains one of the only Allied convoys during World War II to completely vanish in favorable weather with no enemy engagement, no distress signal, and no physical trace. Some say it was a ghost convoy from the start. Others say it was a secret mission that went terribly wrong. And then there are those who believe it never truly disappeared. It was taken. The Nazi Bell. Science or science fiction? As the Allies closed in on the heart of Nazi Germany in 1945, they discovered many strange and chilling things: underground bunkers, mountains of stolen artwork, experimental aircraft. But few mysteries have proven as perplexing as Die Glock, or the Bell. This alleged secret Nazi project has become one of the most enduring and bizarre legends of the war, described alternately as a time machine, anti-gravity device, or even an early interdimensional weapon. The first whisperings of Die Glock came not during the war itself, but decades later, in the 1960s, through the testimony of a Polish intelligence officer turned journalist, Igor Witkowski. According to Witkowski, he gained access to classified transcripts from Nazi scientist interrogations, particularly those involving SS officer Jacob Sporenberg. Sporenberg, a high-ranking official, reportedly described a top-secret experiment deep in the Owl Mountains of what is now modern-day Poland. There, hidden beneath the structure of a facility known only as Der Ries, the Giant, a bell-shaped machine was under construction. Die Glock was said to be made of a heavy metal casing, roughly 4 meters tall and 2.5 meters wide, resembling a large iron bell. Inside were 2 rotating cylinders filled with a mysterious purplish liquid code named Zerum 525, which some researchers speculate could have been a radioactive mercury compound. When activated, the machine emitted powerful electromagnetic fields. The rotation created a strange humming sound and caused nearby plants to decay rapidly. Test animals placed within the chamber reportedly died horribly. Some even appeared to crystallize or decompose within seconds. Sporenberg's account also mentioned something more alarming: the effect Die Glock had on time and gravity. Some scientists involved in the project allegedly suffered neurological damage, hallucinations, or simply vanished. One engineer, according to the transcript, stepped into the field for only 2 minutes and emerged hours later with burns and frostbite-like injuries. Others hinted that the device was capable of distorting time itself, a claim that has been hotly contested by mainstream physicists but embraced by fringe theorists and historical sleuths. What elevates Die Glock from obscure myth to serious historical curiosity is the scale of secrecy and death surrounding it. Over 60 scientists and technicians associated with the project were allegedly executed by the SS as Germany fell, ostensibly to protect its secrets. Their identities remain largely unknown, and no definitive documentation of the bell's design or existence has ever been recovered. Only fragments, blueprints, anecdotal recollections, and pieces of decoded wartime messages. Still, circumstantial evidence piles up. Multiple Allied intelligence operations, including Project Paperclip, were obsessed with locating certain German scientists after the war. Not just rocket engineers like Wernher von Braun, but those involved in exotic physics and radiation research. Some of these individuals vanished before the Allies could capture them. A few showed up years later in unexpected places: Argentina, South Africa, and possibly even the US, living under new identities. And then there's the strange structure near Ludwikowice, Poland, a concrete henge-like ring known to locals as the flytrap. This reinforced circle of pillars is often pointed to by believers as the testing rig for Die Glocke, possibly used to tether the device during early trial runs. Engineers who've examined the site describe its build as unnecessary for anything mundane. No one knows exactly what was tested there. More chilling is the fact that Die Glocke's development was linked to the SS Ahnenerbe, an occult-driven think tank obsessed with ancient knowledge, esoteric sciences, and Aryan mythology. The Ahnenerbe conducted archaeological expeditions in Tibet, the Arctic, and the Middle East in search of lost technologies. Some researchers believe Die Glocke may have been based on ancient principles, reverse-engineered from forgotten civilizations or knowledge hidden in ancient texts. To the SS, this wasn't just science, it was spiritual warfare. Toward the war's end, Die Glocke and the scientists working on it were reportedly relocated. Some say they were moved south to the Alps. Others claim they were loaded onto a massive transport aircraft bound for South America that disappeared over the Atlantic. A few believe Die Glocke was captured by the US and quietly taken stateside. No credible trace of the device has ever surfaced, yet documents from the early Cold War period include multiple references to bell-like phenomena in intelligence cables between Washington and Buenos Aires. In 2001, a retired German intelligence operative claimed to have seen photographs of Die Glocke after the war. He described a silvery machine suspended by chains from a steel gantry, surrounded by dead grass. The photos were supposedly part of an East German archive, all of which were destroyed or relocated before reunification. To this day, no copies have emerged. Skeptics argue that Die Glocke is nothing more than an elaborate myth, possibly concocted or distorted by post-war disinformation efforts. They point to the lack of hard evidence, the absurdity of time travel claims, and the way it blends too perfectly into Cold War-era paranoia. And yet, for a project that never existed, it left a very specific shadow. There are too many whispers from too many places to dismiss outright. What's most unsettling is that, if Die Glocke really was real, it may not have been abandoned. Whether in secret labs beneath the Rockies or hidden vaults beneath the Andes, some believe the technology, or the principles behind it, may have survived. Waiting. The Soviet denial of the Katyn massacre for 50 years. In the dense Katyn forest, just west of the Russian city of Smolensk, spring came late in 1943. But as the frost receded, it revealed a horror buried beneath the soil. Mass graves, row upon row of them. The remains of thousands of Polish officers, their hands bound behind their backs, many with gunshot wounds to the skull. Documents, dog tags, uniforms, and personal effects pointed to a clear identity. These were Polish prisoners of war, captured during the joint Nazi-Soviet invasion of Poland in 1939. When the site was discovered by German forces during their eastern advance, they wasted no time exploiting it for propaganda. They brought in international journalists, including representatives from neutral countries, to document the graves. Forensic examinations conducted by non-German pathologists indicated the killings had occurred around April or May of 1940, a time when the area was firmly under Soviet control. But the Soviet Union immediately denied responsibility. They accused the Nazis of murdering the prisoners in 1941 during their occupation of the region. As the war progressed and the geopolitical needs of the Allies grew more complex, the Western powers made a fateful choice. They accepted Stalin's version of the story. The Katyn massacre had its roots in the Soviet desire to eliminate what they saw as potential threats to communist control in post-war Poland. When the Red Army invaded eastern Poland in 1939, tens of thousands of Polish military officers, professors, doctors, priests, and other members of the intelligentsia were arrested and sent to NKVD-run prison camps. These men were more than soldiers, they were the cultural backbone of a nation. In March 1940, Soviet leadership, including Stalin himself, signed an execution order targeting over 22,000 of these prisoners. They were shot individually and buried in secret. The massacre was meticulously organized. Prisoners were told they were being released and taken for processing. Instead, they were transported in sealed trucks to execution sites in Katyn, Kalinin, and Kharkiv, where NKVD officers carried out the killings with chilling precision, one bullet at a time, often in the back of the head. Bodies were dumped in mass graves and covered with layers of dirt and lime to prevent detection. When the Germans unearthed the site, they saw an opportunity to drive a wedge between the Polish government in exile and the Soviets. The evidence was overwhelming. Letters dated 1940, newspapers, and eyewitness accounts all pointed to Soviet guilt. But for the Allies, the timing was inconvenient. The Soviets were now essential partners in the war against Nazi Germany. Publicly accusing Stalin of war crimes might have fractured the fragile alliance. In response to the discovery, the Polish government in exile in London requested an investigation by the International Red Cross. Stalin was furious. In retaliation, he severed diplomatic ties with the Polish government in exile, accusing them of cooperating with Nazi Germany. The Red Cross refused to act without Soviet approval, which was never given. The massacre was buried again, this time under layers of politics, denial, and fear. For decades, the Soviet narrative remained unchanged. School children in the Eastern Bloc were taught that the Nazis committed the Katyn atrocity. Soviet archives were sealed, and questioning the official story was dangerous, even deadly. In Poland, people whispered the truth at their own peril. But among the Polish diaspora and anti-communist historians, the fight for truth never stopped. Then came the slow unraveling. In the 1950s and 60s, Western researchers continued to gather evidence, survivor testimonies, smuggled documents, and eyewitness reports from locals near Katyn. American and British officials quietly admitted in private that the Soviets were likely guilty. Still, they refused to say so publicly. Declassified documents later revealed that President Roosevelt and Prime Minister Churchill were both informed of Soviet involvement but chose silence for the sake of wartime unity. In 1976, a U.S. congressional committee finally investigated the massacre. Their conclusion was clear: the Soviet Union was responsible. But even then, the official stance from the Kremlin remained denial. For the families of the victims, it was a second betrayal, first by the killers, then by history itself. Everything changed in 1990. With the Soviet Union teetering toward collapse and reformist leader Mikhail Gorbachev pushing for transparency under glasnost, the truth finally emerged. The Soviet government formally admitted responsibility for the Katyn massacre, citing the execution order signed by Stalin and other senior officials. They called it one of the gravest crimes of the Stalin era. But even this confession was incomplete. Russia promised further investigation, but access to many key documents was restricted. To this day, some files remain classified. Polish historians continue to fight for full transparency. And while Moscow has acknowledged Soviet guilt, it has never prosecuted any individuals responsible, nor officially declared the massacre a war crime or genocide. The legacy of Katyn haunts modern Polish-Russian relations. Every anniversary brings new demands for justice, for open archives, for accountability. Memorials have been built, and names etched in stone. But the wound has never fully healed. In 2010, a tragic irony deepened it. A Polish government delegation en route to a Katyn remembrance ceremony died in a plane crash near Smolensk, just miles from the original massacre site. Some Poles believe the crash was no accident. Others say it was fate, a cruel echo of history. Either way, the symbolism was undeniable. The soil of Katyn remains heavy with secrets and sorrow. The massacre was not just a wartime atrocity, it was a calculated attempt to erase a nation's identity. By murdering its thinkers, officers, and leaders, the Soviets hoped to mold Poland in their image. They failed. But their denial lasted longer than many of the lives they took. Even now, the final word on Katyn has yet to be written. Truth, it seems, is as slow to rise from the earth as the bodies that once lay beneath it. The mystery of Rudolf Hess's solo flight to Scotland. On the evening of May 10, 1941, as London braced for another night of Luftwaffe air raids, an unusual aircraft appeared on British radar. It was a twin-engine Messerschmitt Bf-110, flying alone and at low altitude. By the time British fighters scrambled to intercept it, the pilot had already bailed out and parachuted into a field near Eaglesham, south of Glasgow, Scotland. Local farmers rushed to the scene and found the man injured but alive. He identified himself, shockingly, as Rudolf Hess, Deputy Führer of Nazi Germany. News of his capture spread like wildfire. But the man who had once been Hitler's closest confidant was now a mystery wrapped in contradiction. Why had one of the highest-ranking Nazis risked his life flying solo across enemy skies into Britain? What was his real mission? And most haunting of all, was Hess truly acting alone? Initially, the British government, and even King George VI, thought this might be a trap or some elaborate pre-invasion ploy. But under interrogation, Hess claimed he had come to negotiate peace. His version of events was that he had grown disillusioned with Hitler's expansionist ambitions and wanted to prevent further bloodshed. He said he believed there were members of the British aristocracy, particularly within the Duke of Hamilton's circle, who were sympathetic to Germany and could help broker a settlement between Britain and the Third Reich. The Duke of Hamilton confirmed that Hess had indeed requested a private meeting. Though the two men had met once during the 1936 Olympics, the Duke denied any prior involvement in Hess's plans. Yet something about the entire situation felt off. Hess, known for his loyalty to Hitler and his intense obsession with astrology and the occult, had not behaved like a traitor until then. Moreover, the Nazi regime quickly disowned him. Hitler, in a broadcast just days later, claimed Hess was mentally ill and had acted without authorization. The message was clear: whatever had happened, the Third Reich would not stand behind it. Hess's flight came at a curious time. Just a month later, Germany would launch Operation Barbarossa, the massive and devastating invasion of the Soviet Union. Some historians believe Hess was sent with Hitler's blessing in a last-ditch effort to ensure Britain stayed out of the conflict on the Eastern Front. Others claim he was acting independently, possibly manipulated by astrologers or misled by false promises from British agents. One prevailing theory suggests that elements of British intelligence might have covertly lured Hess into defecting as a psychological blow to Nazi morale, or to gather intelligence. But Hess never revealed everything. During his captivity, he became increasingly reclusive, paranoid, and erratic. British doctors examined him and documented signs of amnesia and delusional thinking. He would claim he had a body double, that his food was being poisoned, or that his guards were actors. Some attributed this to the stress of betrayal and isolation. Others believed he was feigning madness to avoid accountability, or perhaps had been manipulated by deeper forces. At the Nuremberg trials, Hess was deemed unfit to stand trial for a time due to his mental state. Yet he was eventually convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment for crimes against peace. He served that sentence not in a normal prison, but in Spandau prison, a specially designated facility in West Berlin overseen by the four major Allied powers. Even more oddly, while the other top Nazi prisoners were released or died over the years, Hess remained Spandau's sole occupant for over 20 years. This raised many questions. Why would the Allies, particularly the Soviets, insist on keeping an old man locked away alone, at immense cost and complexity? The Soviets consistently vetoed any suggestions of clemency or transfer. Even after the Cold War thawed, they would not budge. It was as if Hess knew something that couldn't be allowed to see the light of day. In 1987, at the age of 93, Rudolf Hess was found dead in the garden house of Spandau prison. The official story was suicide by hanging. But his family and many observers were skeptical. They pointed out that Hess was frail, watched constantly, and incapable of lifting himself to such a height. The rope he allegedly used came from an unknown source. Even the autopsy report had inconsistencies. His son, Wolf Rudiger Hess, publicly accused British intelligence of murdering his father to keep secrets buried forever. Those secrets. They may have had nothing to do with peace negotiations, and everything to do with what Hess knew about Nazi plans, secret programs, or collaborations that could have embarrassed powerful people in post-war Europe. Some suggest that Hess may have been privy to deals between Nazi industrialists and British companies prior to the war. Others claim he held knowledge of occult experiments or even early contacts with parties sympathetic to Germany inside the UK. There are even more radical theories that the man captured in Scotland was not Hess at all, but a body double or decoy, an imposter who had been programmed or brainwashed. Supporters of this idea cite discrepancies in photographs, scars, dental records, and even handwriting analyses. In 2019, a DNA test on blood samples from Spandau, cross-verified with a living Hess relative, debunked this theory, confirming the imprisoned man was indeed Rudolf Hess. But that only settled one question. The rest remain unanswered. Why did he really come? Was his peace offer genuine, or part of a darker agenda? And why was he imprisoned for life when so many worse war criminals were released? The Hess affair remains one of World War II's most enigmatic side plots, a story full of shadows, missing documents, political taboos, and a man who took most of his secrets to a grave that, some say, wasn't meant to hold him at all. The missing gold of Yamashita's treasure. As the Second World War neared its chaotic end in the Pacific, the Japanese Empire was in retreat. With Allied forces closing in, General Tomoyuki Yamashita, known as the Tiger of Malaya, was tasked with defending the Philippines, a strategic location, and perhaps a burial ground for one of the greatest wartime mysteries of all time, Yamashita's treasure. The legend is rooted in a very real history of looting. From the early 1930s through the 1940s, Japanese forces, along with their secretive elite unit known as the Golden Lily, pillaged across Asia, plundering gold, jewelry, priceless art, and religious artifacts from China, Korea, Burma, Malaysia, and beyond. Some of the loot was reportedly melted down and stamped with the imperial chrysanthemum. It was an operation of enormous scale, backed by powerful families in Japan and personally overseen by high-ranking officials, including, some allege, members of the royal family. As defeat loomed, it's believed the Japanese began transferring their treasure to the Philippines, intending to use the rugged islands as a final stronghold or to hide the loot until they could return for it later. According to sources, tunnels were dug deep into mountain ranges, traps and explosives were laid, and entire cave systems were sealed using concrete, some with the help of enslaved laborers who were later buried alive to protect the location's secrecy. One notorious site is said to be in the mountains of Luzon, where dozens of compartments were carved into the rock and loaded with gold ingots, religious icons, and even diamond-encrusted swords. General Yamashita was allegedly unaware of the full scope of the operation. Much of the treasure-hiding effort was managed by Prince Yasuhito Chichibu, acting in secret with the Golden Lily Group and various Yakuza connections. But Yamashita's name became forever attached to the horde when he surrendered in 1945 and was later executed for war crimes. As history was written, so too was the legend. Billions in treasure, hidden in the jungles of the Philippines, waiting for someone to find it. And someone did, or so the story goes. In the 1970s, a Filipino locksmith named Rogelio Roxas claimed to have discovered one of the treasure sites near Baguio City. Guided by a former Japanese soldier and old war maps, he and his team tunneled into a cave system and uncovered what he described as a hidden vault. Inside, he allegedly found gold bars, crates filled with artifacts, and a solid gold Buddha weighing over a ton, with a removable head that contained dozens of diamonds. Roxas said he only managed to remove one gold bar and the Buddha before government agents, acting under the order of then-President Ferdinand Marcos, seized the treasure. Roxas was arrested, beaten, and jailed. He died mysteriously years later. The case didn't die with him. In the 1990s, Roxas's heirs filed suit against Marcos's estate in a U.S. court. Witnesses testified to seeing vaults full of gold in Malacanang Palace, and Marcos himself was accused of using Yamashita's treasure to fund his lavish rule. The court eventually awarded the Roxas family a staggering $22 billion in damages, though collecting the full amount proved impossible. Still, the ruling gave new legitimacy to what had long been dismissed as myth. Yet, the deeper one looks, the murkier things become. Declassified CIA documents revealed that American intelligence may have known about the treasure all along. Some accounts suggest U.S. agents recovered part of the hoard and secretly used it to finance anti-communist operations throughout Asia during the Cold War, under a black budget operation referred to as the Black Eagle Trust. Former OSS officers turned intelligence operatives reportedly used the gold to support coups, arm insurgents, and sway elections in countries from Indonesia to Vietnam. These claims are supported by a handful of whistleblowers, including former intelligence agents and even a few ex-members of the Marcos Inner Circle. According to them, some of the treasure was flown out on U.S. military planes. Some say it ended up in Swiss banks. Others say it was melted down and re-stamped as Federal Reserve bullion. But no official documentation confirms any of this. Then there's the sheer number of treasure hunters who have died or disappeared while chasing the legend. Caves collapse. Maps lead nowhere. Locals whisper of curses and booby traps. And still, the search continues. As recently as the 2010s, excavation projects across the Philippines, often in secret and without permits, have stirred controversy and excitement. Some dig sites are reportedly backed by silent partners in Japan, the US, and even China. For skeptics, Yamashita's treasure is a tantalizing fairy tale, a fusion of greed, conspiracy, and wartime myth. They argue that even if Japan did loot Asia, it's unlikely so much of it was buried in one region. And if it were, someone by now would have found undeniable proof, a vault, a photo, a document that can't be faked. But for others, treasure hunters, historians, and even intelligence analysts, the puzzle remains very much alive. The scale of the operation, the consistency of accounts, and the lingering legal and financial footprints suggest something very real was hidden, and perhaps still lies waiting beneath Philippine soil. Maybe it's buried treasure. Maybe it's a cover for deeper international finance networks tied to wartime atrocities. Or maybe it's both. One thing is certain, Yamashita's treasure didn't die with the war. It's alive in courtrooms, in legends, and in the greed and ambition of those still chasing it. Every case adds a new layer of mystery, leaving more questions than answers. Which one lingers in your mind, and what's your take on what really happened?